Um, I am Ruth Stokes, and I am the Membership and Engagement Officer at JCWI. I am really pleased that so many people have joined us today. It's the first time we've done an event like this, so we're really excited to have so many people signed up. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your afternoon. We're holding this event today because we're a few weeks away from launching a new campaign, which will be calling for quite a radical rethink of the way that migrants are treated in the UK. And partly what we want to do with that campaign is to get people thinking and imagining and not just accepting the world as it is, but thinking about how the world could be. Partly we want to focus that campaign on the rights of undocumented migrants in the UK. And as a result, we need to find ways that people are able to safely share their stories while remaining anonymous. And as we get ready to launch this campaign, we are kind of actively looking for illustrators and visual artists to work with to help us tell some of these stories. And we have an open call out, which I will talk a little bit more about towards the end. But today I'm really excited to bring together migrants' rights campaigners and artists and activists who can talk about the creative practices that they have and the ways that they use that to influence kind of social change or to think about social change. So I won't go on any longer. I'm going to start by handing over to our Public Affairs and Campaigns Manager at JCWI, Minnie Rahman. And she is going to talk a little bit about the campaign that we're going to be launching in a few weeks from now. Hopefully everyone can see Minnie.
Hi everyone. I don't mind if you can't see me, to be honest, but I suppose it works best if you can. So thanks so much for having me. And as Ruth said, I want to talk a bit about where the idea for the campaign came from and what we're going to be prioritising in the next few months. So just for a bit of background, JCWI is one of the oldest migrants' rights charities in the country. We've been around since the 60s, and we've campaigned on a whole bunch of issues which affect migrants, from sort of families who've been separated by the minimum income requirement to the Windrush scandal. And we've engaged in a lot of different ways of campaigning over the years. And in the last few months, I suppose during the pandemic, we've really been focusing on ensuring that migrants are protected, and both from contracting coronavirus and from the sort of system that we've got in place. And over the last few months, that has led to a few successes, a few small wins. But I think it's really been a bit of a learning experience for us as an organisation and for migrants' rights campaigners in general, which has really shown us where there are inadequacies in the migration system. And it's made us think about how we can realign our campaigns to reflect the experiences that migrants have had in the last 6 months. So I think we've seen two things occurring almost symbiotically. So first of all, there's been a real and desperate need to ensure that migrants and their family members have access to basic services and protection from contracting coronavirus. And the biggest challenge for that has been the hostile environment, which is the set of policies that was put in place back in 2012 to stop people from accessing basic public services and things like employment and housing. So the effects have obviously been most acute for undocumented migrants, but have also had an impact on documented communities too. So there's been, a fear of seeking medical treatment, lack of access to safe housing, no recourse to public funds, and exploitative working practices, which have really meant that migrant communities haven't been able to keep themselves and their families safe and healthy, and in many cases have been disproportionately exposed to coronavirus. So, for example, we've seen groups of migrants who were forced to continue working in unsafe conditions because they were faced with the choice of either keep working or be pushed into destitution. Some of you might have heard about what happened in Leicester at the Boohoo factory. So there were a lot of migrant workers there who were forced to continue working in unsafe conditions for below minimum wage, being heavily exploited by their employers because their employers knew that they didn't have any other options but to keep working during a pandemic. And I think there's also been very little recognition from the public that undocumented migrants who don't have access to any of the safety net that we would have had, so no furlough schemes, no universal credit, none of that stuff, that they have been forced to continue working in the illegal or black economy, if you want to call it, as care workers or cleaners or nannies, and they don't have any rights to support if they need it. So that's the first bit of the conversation that has been occurring for us. And then at the same time, I think there's been sort of emerging public consensus about the way that we define and value work and how that doesn't actually fit with the experiences of real people during this crisis. So we all know that the key work is keeping us afloat have been made up almost entirely of people that the government calls low skilled, even though they're now calling them essential workers or key workers. And many of those groups are migrants themselves or come from migrant backgrounds or have migrant family members. So you have groups like cleaners, taxi drivers, delivery drivers, shopkeepers, nurses, carers, plumbers, even primary school teachers, who are all not considered to be high-skilled workers, which means that they are exactly the groups of people who would fall foul of the new system that the government is putting in place in 2021, which is called the points-based system. So you have these two conversations about work occurring simultaneously, and they really highlight the important role that work has to play in our society and has played during the pandemic. And we're sort of at a point where the government and the public are starting to think about how we can rebuild our economy, but more importantly and more fundamentally our society based on what we have collectively experienced. So for us, it's shown that we have to get rid of the hostile environment. We absolutely must scrap it, and that has to be the priority for migrants' rights campaigners. But that this is also an opportunity to fundamentally reimagine the way that we define work and the rights that migrant workers have. So we are thinking of starting to campaign on these issues, and the things that we will be asking for is ensuring that all migrants are able to work legally, which is a key part of the hostile environment, is, you know, getting rid of that illegal working offence, making sure that all migrants can access union support and have full protection from exploitative employers. And I think we have to start thinking about how we can shift the conversation away from what work is valuable and instead towards a levelling up of rights for all workers. So we're thinking about this campaign for a new deal on migration, and we'll be launching that in the next few months as we start to think about a post-coronavirus society. So I think for me and for us as an organisation, this is really where the art and activism side comes into the conversation. Like, I'm not an artist, and I'm definitely not an expert in anything artistic, but I have been a campaigner for a really long time, almost too long, and probably, like a lot of you on this call, recognise that there are so many barriers to campaigning for migrants' rights. So, you know, first of all, there are already strong existing narratives which tell migrant stories for them and are full of xenophobia and racism. And it's really hard for us to get our own narrative across because those things are so set in stone already. And secondly, because we have such a draconian immigration system, just like Ruth said, and because of those structures we have in place, migrants themselves are often unheard by the public or struggle to get their stories out there. So it feels like an uphill battle a lot of the time. And also I think that a lot of the way that campaigners and migrants' rights activists are currently campaigning on this issue is to focus a lot of that conversation at decision makers and to focus a lot of that change at politicians and the people in power. But as a campaigner, I really don't believe that change happens through just one mechanism. It doesn't just happen by asking politicians to make decisions. Actually, I think politicians are probably always the last bit of the journey. They come on board when it's really clear that they will be supported by the public. So I think that there needs to be a focus on other avenues for change which don't focus on decision makers, but focus on expressing our thoughts and feelings. And I think, you know, art in all its forms allows us to be more bold and expressive than we could ever be talking to politicians, whilst also changing people's minds and inspiring them and allowing people to tell their own stories. So I don't think I'll say much more at that point, because you've got some amazing artists that you know that you should be hearing from. But I really hope that those of you who are interested in art and activism and migrants' rights will be inspired by the people that we've got on this panel today, and that we can find a way to channel the energy and opportunity of this moment into getting a new deal for migrants as we look towards the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Minnie. It was a really helpful introduction. I think kind of sets the tone and also sets a bit of a challenge for us all. I think there's a lot to kind of think about with this campaign and to kind of bring this work together. So next up, I'm really pleased to introduce Alicia Nandra. Alicia is an illustrator and printmaker whose work has been commissioned by BuzzFeed, the Los Angeles Times, and she's also been at the Barbican, amongst other things. She's also a co-founder of the artist-led cafe Milk a Chai. So I will hand over to you now, Alicia, and also get your slides.
Great, thanks so much, Ruth.
There we go.
Amazing. All right, thanks for that introduction. So yeah, as Ruth said, I work as an illustrator and printmaker. I also work in the small press scene and comics and zines, if anyone's familiar with any of that. And I am also part of the team that runs Milk a Chai. So I guess the way, I mean, it's interesting we're talking about activism and art. And I guess the way I've come to that was through making work, meeting other artists who were passionate about lots of things, and supporting each other and kind of building up friendships that way. And I think that's how a lot of my work and my activism comes out. It's through forging friendships and connections with people. When I'm not working as an illustrator, I'm also facilitating workshops for young people. So I've worked with young refugees. You know, we've been making work, yeah, I guess just making work so they could have time away from, you know, the real life situations that we're going through, for example. And I'm also really passionate about education and promoting the arts. So I'm just going to take you through a few different pieces of work and kind of show you through my practice before I get on to talking about Milk a Chai. So yeah, the piece you can see now, hopefully everyone can see it on their screens. It's a piece of work I made for the Association of Illustrators last year. There was a big group exhibition, and this was all about innovation and being inspired to innovate. And for me, a big part of my work as well is being really conscious about who I show in my work, because I grew up here in the UK as a British Indian and didn't really see myself reflected in mainstream media, for one, but also illustration, you know, whether that's picture books or just graphic arts in general. So I really make an effort to, you know, if I put a person in my work, I want them to be reflective of, you know, me, my friendship group, and also the society we live in. So that's what this was inspired by. I also really have a thing for like big cats and nature and stuff. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Ruth. This is a piece I made recently during lockdown for the Barbican. It was for a project working with school kids in East London, and they worked with a couple of music producers to produce their own songs. I believe it was something that was done remotely, which is really cool. And again, just reiterating what I said earlier, you know, I think it's really important for young people to see themselves reflected, you know, in graphic work as well. Next slide, please. This is a piece of work I made for a company called Diaspora Co. So they're a direct trade spice company run by a wonderful lady called Sana, and she is originally from India, now based in California, and they, as I said, it's direct trade, so it's even better than fair trade. You know, she buys direct from the farmers, provides them with healthcare. There's no worker abuse. She employs lots of women. Just an overall brilliant company, and their spices are fantastic as well. But it was really nice to kind of take inspiration from my heritage and kind of put like a modern twist on this. Next slide, please. Again, another piece for the Barbican. Yeah, these were just kind of examples of kind of what I do day to day commercially. This was for an article about ambient music. Just, yeah, I really enjoy like bold colors and that kind of thing. Yeah, if you don't mind going to the next one, sorry. Again, nature, animals, that kind of thing. Again, this is just, I guess this is actually an example of the printmaking that I do. So this was then turned into a screen print. Next, please. Yeah, an example of what a print looks like in the flesh. Yeah, I really enjoy just making kind of just fun images away from working on commercial work for clients and stuff. Next. And this is kind of getting on to, I guess, it's more topical for this conversation. I'm a big advocate for mental health and talking about it through my own personal experiences of, I guess, how difficult these things are to speak about in minorities and in communities. You know, my own experience of watching a close family member go through a serious mental illness and just discovering actually how a lot of the vocabulary doesn't exist in native languages for this kind of thing. And also, you know, there's a massive stigma still about it. I guess lack of education about it, about how it's actually, you know, an illness, as invisible as it might be. So a lot of my work kind of focuses on this kind of thing. So this short comic is about essentially getting an anxiety attack. I'll leave it up there for a minute just in case anyone's having a read, but these are all on, I've got bits on my website and on my social media if you'd like to have a read through. Okay, we're going to the next one. This one is a strange one, actually. Again, it's about isolation and anxiety. And weirdly enough, I made this last year with no idea what was going to happen this year. It's about, you know, feeling trapped in your own mind. But I used a house as a visual vehicle for that. And it's just funny how, I mean, it's not funny, but, you know, we've all been trapped in our houses. And it's funny how sometimes you make work and then find that it's reflected in the world in some way. But again, yes, this one's about mental health. Don't mind going to this one. This is kind of a big one. Again, about mental health. This is more, I guess, true to life. This is a comic that I made, as I said, following watching a family member go through a very serious mental illness, and it was my coping mechanism for kind of dealing with the situation and watching someone go through this. And also just testament to show how powerful, you know, creativity in any form, you know, whether that's drawing, writing, dancing, you know, singing, how fantastic it can be for an outlet. Because initially I made this as just a release for myself. And I shared it with a very close friend who, you know, suggested that I should publish it as it might, you know, help people kind of understand a similar situation they might be going through. And if Ruth goes to the next slide, there's a couple of pages. So this is the first page. And essentially I used masks as a metaphor for just kind of talking about how when you look at someone with a mental illness, they look like the person that you think they are, but a lot of the things that are coming out their mouth or the way they're acting, you know, is totally different to who you might think you'd be speaking to. And I think there's another page. Again, if you would like to read more, this is all online everywhere. Yeah, and this was really important to me because, as I said, you know, I found that my family really didn't understand what was happening and we didn't have the language to talk about it. You know, trying to explain things to people, I found that was very difficult. So I don't know, I'm kind of getting to the point where I'd like to translate this into you know, my mother tongue, which is Punjabi, and then hopefully Hindi and a few other South Asian languages, and distribute this. But that's ongoing. If you don't mind going to the next slide. And this kind of brings me on to a residency I did with British Council. I'm just checking how much time I've got. So following making that comic and a lot of my other narrative work, I was invited by British Council and Ladies Do Comics to do a residency in Kathmandu in Nepal last year, and it's called Creating Heroines. And I was there with 15 other artists, identifying as female or non-binary, all from South Asia or the South Asian diaspora. In my case, I was one of 3 artists to come over from the UK. So there's artists from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Nepal, and we all made work about women's issues and issues affecting marginalized people for a week. And if Ruth goes to the next slide, I made a comic, a wordless comic about mental health. We essentially had workshops across the week, and we were talking about lots of different issues. And again, you know, that whole thing about not having vocabulary for me cropped up again. So I wanted to make a piece of work that had no words, that hopefully could be understood by, you know, everyone. Following this residency, I was invited to apply for funding along with all the other artists to run our own projects and further our work. So if you go to the next slide, Ruth. So myself and Sophia Niazi, who is 1/3 of UMPK, which stands for One of My Kind, a collective of artists here in the UK, and we decided to apply for funding to run Milka Chai, which means tea together in Hindi. And essentially it's a friendship cafe, and our goal is to nurture enterprise and friendship across caste, class and religion, because what we got out of that experience in Nepal was our, you know, the main thing I got out of it certainly was the friendships that I formed. You know, no matter what kind of backgrounds we were from or what kind of different journeys we'd been on, the connections we made with each other were just so strong. Even being in Nepal, it was very interesting. You know, it was a very neutral place for everyone to travel to. You know, for example, you know, one of my friends from India wouldn't have been able to really travel to Pakistan as easily, you know, as she would have Nepal, and vice versa. So we were kind of talking about borders and how we could break those down by creating a space where people who wouldn't usually talk to each other could come together and, you know, perhaps form a friendship that they wouldn't have thought would have been likely. And tea itself is something that exists all across South Asia in lots of different forms. And then funnily enough, for us from the diaspora in the UK, tea is also quite a big thing here. So that was kind of our meeting point. We also spent a lot of time hanging out and drinking lots of cha in Nepal. So if you go to the next slide, we actually ran a pop-up in Nepal later in the year, last year in November, just gone. It's been almost a year, which is crazy. But we took over this little chai dhaba in Kathmandu, and you can see auntie and uncle in the middle that looked after us very well. And we ran a program of events for 5 days. So it was myself, Sophia, who's holding the Milka Chai sign. We had Nush Nayankara, who is British Sri Lankan and a BAFTA winning animator who made a beautiful stop motion animation for us. We had Sherzal Malik, who's an artist from Pakistan, and Rachita Taneja, who's an artist from India, and Aki Tami, who runs Sister Library in India, an indigenous artist, and she also runs the first feminist library to exist in India. So we have all these fantastic friends that we made. We, you know, invited them to come over and give talks about their work and display their work. And if Ruth flicks through, there's a couple of pictures. So yeah, this is what it looked like on the outside. It was very lo-fi. We had a projector. We were all giving talks, all squashed into this little cafe. It was really good fun. If you keep going. And we also made a zine as part of the project called Women's Work. We interviewed lots of South Asian businesswomen. And produce that because it was all about promoting, I guess, the voices that aren't heard so much in South Asia. So we're hoping to continue that as a series. And sorry, Ruth, you can go to the next one now. And after our trip in Nepal in January this year, this was January 2020, which is just, it's incredible for me to still see that many people in one room together. But we ran one here in London, kind of showing all our friends' work from Nepal, and I guess nurturing the same kind of space that we wanted to create in Nepal. Just invited people to speak to each other. And we're hoping to run more events in the future. It's pending, obviously, you know, depending what goes on with this pandemic. But I guess just to sum up, this is kind of where I think, you know, creativity and activism can really come together, whether it is just on this level of like making space for people to talk, you know, to make friendships, to discuss things that I guess, you know, people wouldn't usually be comfortable talking about, just creating a safe space for people. Yeah, and that's kind of me done, I think. Yep, those are little puppets from the cafe. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Alicia. It's so great to see all your work, and yeah, the Milk and Chai project is so fascinating. I think we'll kind of come a lot onto this theme of kind of collaboration and working together. Just to say, we'll take questions at the end, but so do submit them either in the chat box or in the Q&A. I can't see them while I'm sharing the screen with the slides on, so I can't answer them as we go, but we'll come to all of them at the end. Okay, I'm going to hand over next to Hayley Venus. Hayley is a community organizer, a social entrepreneur, a performer, and a creative artist. She helped establish Spoken, which is a collective of young people who use creative and cultural expression as a catalyst for positive social change. So over to you, Hayley.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Hope all is well on your end. Thank you for having me. It's a sort of beautiful opportunity to be able to share what we've been doing and how we express our art and how we use that to create change. So just to give you a little background about myself, I've been working within the community for over 8 years. I first started in 2012. I just finished university. I was a parent of 2 at that time. And I really wanted to get into the field of finance, actually. And at the time, I'd finished university, but I couldn't get work, and it was really, really difficult for me. And I faced quite a lot of rejection at that point. I didn't have the practical skills to match my degree at the time. At that point, I made up my mind that if, you know, somebody wouldn't give me the opportunity, that I was going to create an opportunity for myself. And I was sure that there must be other people like myself, maybe university graduates, that want to do something but maybe haven't been given the opportunity to do so. Anyway, at that point, I started a fashion show, which is called Inspiring Edge at the time, which I brought together loads of different creatives from my local area, and we worked together to put on this fashion production. And it was awesome. At the end, you know, we had loads of different creatives coming together. And what we did is we chose a different charity each year to support and campaign for. So from the success of the first one, we've been able to run 8 annual shows. This year would have been the 9th one, but COVID. And yeah, we've been able to use that as an opportunity to connect with young people locally of all nationalities, all communities, without any barriers. And it just gave us that freedom to express art. So whether that be singing, you know, fashion design, illustration, poetry, and so forth. So that was my first real experience of like using art to, you know, engage with people, engage with the community, and really connect and share our message and our story through fashion mainly, but other forms of arts as well. Then later on in my life, say 2015, I also started a community interest company, which is called Make a Step. And that also uses the arts to connect with young people and allow them to build social skills, personal development skills, and also see their own value and how they can contribute to their own communities. So I started that in 2015, and we started off in Jamaica, but we were always based in London. And now we've been able to take, you know, maybe I think it's 31 volunteers from all over the world to these mission trips to Jamaica, St. Lucia, Gambia, and also Kenya. So that was the second opportunity I had to really use art. We would take volunteers from, let's say, London or America sometimes, but that have an interest in using art as a way of communicating or as a medium for conversation. And then, as I said, since then, we've been on 11 international trips. We've taken 31 volunteers, and we've served over thousands of children through creative arts, and using that as a way to connect and really help them create the change that they want to see. Moving on from then, we started the Spoken initiative, and that is very special to me. It's my most recent baby, and that particular project is around using poetry to tell stories, and to have the conversations, as Alicia was saying, have the conversations in a safe space. And we used to explore different themes. So sometimes it might be war and conflict, it might be identity, it might be blue sky thinking, it might be transformation, and using those different themes to really connect with people through our community organizing practicing, which involves a lot of listening, bringing people together, and then helping them to organize and create their own hubs for change as well. So Spoken in particular, we've been doing it for, it's going to be 3 years in October, and we've had the opportunity to support loads of different people that are dealing with mental health sometimes, or ill mental health, sorry, and just from different backgrounds, and just giving them the opportunity, the platform. Some of them even up to today are so grateful for the opportunity to just to be able to share their story, you know, and that making room for conversation, or even for us to signpost them into the services within the community that can really help them move forward. So that's Spoken. Yeah, so in regards to the creative organizations, that's those 3 things. And then myself as a performer, I've been using poetry, I sing, I write music, and I also work with a lot of youth groups, a lot of youth charities within Haringey, and internationally as well, using poetry workshops, different forms of creativity, so art as well, to connect with young people and really just bridge the gap. So give them the opportunity to have conversations again, in a safe space where we can really explore, you know, the root cause of some of these things that young people are experiencing within our borough. My normal role, my day-to-day, I don't know how I fit it in, but my day-to-day job is a migrant community organizer. And I think that's where the real connection is between myself and JCWI. I work with migrants on a day-to-day, helping them to get orientated or to feel welcome or integrated within Haringey. So I work with a lot of organizations, supporting them, signposting some of the migrants that I meet on a daily basis into the services that can help them within their transition, or wherever they, or meet them at their need. So through that, we've been able to work with UASC, which is an organization that deals with young people that are often, you know, migrants, or they haven't yet got status in the UK. Within Selby Centre as well, we offer a food bank, food provision. So for people that don't have access to public funds, they can get, you know, not means tested, sorry, access to food, so they can help their family throughout this difficult time. I guess my main message through art is that we all have a story to tell. We all have something inside us that was given just for us, and I guess using art to create safe spaces gives us the opportunity to really create change, really have conversations, meaningful conversations as well, that can support us in our journey. And we can all learn something from each other. Some of the people that come into our offices on a daily basis, they're always teaching me something about their culture, and it's so beautiful. Like that's the beauty of art, because it's colorful, you know, it's not just black and white, it's yellow, it's the pinks, it's the blended colors as well in the background that really create a beautiful space and a beautiful country as well. So I guess my advice to anybody that would want to get started in, using art in activism, my first step I always say to people is just do it. Don't think. Just start drawing whatever comes to you. Even with writing, if you don't journal already, that is a good thing to start doing. To set aside, whether it's 5 minutes at the end of the day, to just write whatever it is that comes to you. I guess as well, tap into networks such as, I'll send my details as well afterwards, but tap into services that support art work or support the platform for sharing a story. And then lastly, I would just say, just keep the connections and always write your ideas down. Like a lot of the things that we've started now, let's say, I had written maybe a few years ago, but only now they're materializing. So it's just always important. Don't dismiss any ideas that come to you. Everything that flows from you is important. And somebody needs to hear it. So I guess that's it on that front. Have I got any extra time?
You have more time if you want it.
Okay. Now I just wanted to say one last thing. I'd say if you want to connect with me, I'm based at the Selby Centre at the moment. But or if you're interested in poetry as well, we have a lot of poetry opportunities coming up. And we love to integrate, we love to connect with people. And we have a lot of training as well around community organising. That's going to be becoming available on an online premise as well. So that will give you an opportunity to tap into a new set of skills, especially if you're thinking of starting your own campaign or there's something that you want to change. So definitely connect. Write in your journals and just express yourself and connect. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Hayley. I remember when we met last year, I came away from our meeting feeling exactly as I do now, which is like, yeah, I can totally do this. This is so doable. So thank you very much. Okay, please do keep questions coming in. I can see some messages popping up, so thank you for that. Last but not least, we have Zain Dada. So Zain is a writer, researcher and cultural producer. He's currently the program manager at the charity Maslaha, and he has co-founded a platform for British Muslim artists called the Hida Collective. So I'm going to hand over to him and also get the slides back up. 1 second.
Thank you, Ruth. And it's been really lovely hearing everyone and hearing everyone's different divergent approaches to creativity and campaigns. My name is Zain. Hello, everyone. I'm a cultural producer. That's a sort of term, that's a difficult, vague term to sort of describe what I've been doing over the last decade, which sort of consists of initiating projects across different artistic mediums and oftentimes intersects with campaigning work. So I thought I'd maybe start by giving everyone an indication of sort of where I draw my inspiration from. So if you go to the next slide, Ruth. So I think the first port of call is around a decade ago, I was part of a youth poetry collective. Decade makes me feel a bit old, to be honest, but that youth poetry collective was started at my local youth centre, and it was really this theatre practitioner / poet called RG who cultivated a space for me and lots of other young people to, in a similar way to what Hayley described, to meet, to convene, to chat, and use poetry as a sort of means of catharsis. We happen to be young Black and brown people, young people who in many ways are maybe a little bit underexposed to what the cultural sector, arts and cultural sector was or looks like. So that sort of being part of that and RG sort of opening up that space as a youth worker gave a real sense of what's out there in terms of arts institutions what's out there in terms of us being able to have a voice in many of the similar ways that Hayley's described sort of her brilliant work with spoken. And through that, I met a poet by the name of Remy Kanazi, who's on the top left, and he's a Brooklyn-based Palestinian poet. And I kind of learned through his work, just as a young person who was interested in writing poetry at the time I was 16, that he's using his creativity and his poetry to advocate for Palestinians. And I thought that was interesting. Okay, he's using his work. And at the time I ended up starting a little blog and just writing and writing really cringeworthy sort of indignant poems, mostly in response to, at that time it was what was happening at that time, about a decade ago. I think it was like sort of the media cycle around British Muslims that was making me feel like, cool, I'm not, you know, my community or my diverse communities are being portrayed in particular ways, etc. So that was a real prompt, and that's just to give an indication of what I identified as creativity in campaigns. And then following on that, I discovered an arts education program called Voices That Shake, which is run by Fazana Khan, or was run by Fazana Khan, who was the director. And I sort of met through that, I met, you know, facilitators who are artists in their own right and activists in their own right, such as Delia Snoosi, Zara Dalila, Sakina Sheikh. And a lot of those, you know, in many ways it links to what Alicia said, which is through those connections, I ended up making friends, and also understanding that you can use your creativity and your experiences, your lived experiences to, you know, in a creative sense, and towards campaigns and towards changing systems. And I think there's a real conversation around some people who say, you know, creativity is not going to materially impact people's lives. And I think to a degree, yeah, poems are not going to change the world, but at the same time, it's culture and being able to getting people to empathize with people from different backgrounds, and also to understand what people's sort of history is, what their roots are, can engender change. So I think Shake was a big seminal moment in that. Even though I didn't actually attend the course, I almost vicariously sort of took the course from those individual people. And then lastly, Alicia mentioned them before in her presentation, I came across their work. Consisted of Sophia Niazi, Hibla Amara, and Rose Nordin. And just looking at their work in terms of a grassroots self-published zine. For people who don't know, a zine is like I'm not going to go into, it'll be too long maybe to go into the whole nuances of it, but a self-published magazine, and it has its own sort of countercultural history. So all these things gave me a very seminal sort of rootedness in what creativity in campaigns was. If you can go to the next slide, Ruth. Thank you. So yeah, fast forward a little bit to me being involved in a particular campaign, which probably embodies creativity in campaigns quite well. And again, this was involving a campaign to save a local community center. And I think in many ways, some of these tactics or creative sort of interruptions can be used in different contexts, in the migrant context too. But for this example, it's a community center in South Kilburn that was under threat, and it existed for about a century. And my tangible connection to it was partly through going to a local, being familiar with the area and going to a local space nearby called Rumi's Cave, and coming across Granville primarily through a friend of mine, Delia Snoosi, who lives nearby and also volunteers there and is a trustee there now. And we've sort of got together with the community kitchen that was being run there, that was giving free meals out, and we're trying to oppose Brent Council, who were demolishing that space to put in place luxury flats at the time. This is 2016. So we recognize that Zadie Smith used to attend the Granville. And again, I think in this instance, the use of celebrity and inviting her, so we managed to get in touch through her brother, and she came down, gave a talk. We got an artist, Amina, who illustrated this beautiful poster. So it involved various aspects of creativity. And then there was the producing of the event. So if you go on to the next slide, and then the next one. So that's the Granville Community Kitchen was run by Leslie on the left, and then Zadie Smith, and then Dee Woods, who also co-runs the Granville Community Kitchen, but is also BBC Cook of the Year and is involved in various stuff around food justice, and then Delia Snoosi and myself. So basically, the gist of this was getting a high caliber, sort of high caliber is the worst term to use, someone with clout, right, in a very tangible way to come through and speak. And this is not to say that this is the sort of that celebrities are going to create systemic change at all. It's not, but it is a tactic, and I think there's pros and cons to it, as we're seeing with sort of Marcus Rashford in regards to food justice. So if we go on to the next slide, check how much time I'm using. So yeah, this was the event itself. It was a really beautiful night. In the end, Brent Council U-turned on their decision to demolish it. And that was not just because of this event, but primarily because of the work of Dean Leslie, who put in a lot of time and effort prior. So it was a culmination of things. And if you go on to the next slide. Okay, so have I taken up too much time? Am I, what's?
No, you keep going. You're fine.
Okay, cool. So this is something called, this is a zine again, so in a very similar sort of sphere of work as what Alicia was describing in her practice. And basically, this was the zine which was made to commemorate Shepherd's Bush Market. And I had a familiarity and I had connections within the market and in the area itself. And I was aware and familiar with the fact that these campaigns, just to note, are all relate to public space, but I think there are many transferable things which can be used within a migrant context. So it's just to say that I'm not trying to sort of zero in on public space conversations, but the Shepherd's Bush Market campaign was around, again, a developer wanting to build luxury flats atop Shepherd's Bush Market and increase the lease, the rent, sorry, of the traders in the market itself, which again existed for a century. And there was a concurrent legal campaign going alongside it by the Traders Association, but what we really wanted to do was to provide a space for the stories of market traders to speak for themselves and say, these are my experiences of the market. This is why I think it, this is why I think it should remain. We were given in some cases, fourth generation market traders were given the space after World War I, and were threatened with sort of being moved out. And then following that, what we did, so this was a zine actually designed by Rose Norden, who's also part of UMC. And it was in collaboration with Sana Badri, who's a photographer, and Bushra Fajani, who's a researcher and journalist. If we go to the next slide. So then this is the local MP, Andy Slaughter. So we did a launch for it at Bush Hall. Again, as you can see so far, some of the work I've done has involved events, but also, zine and events. So that's why the term cultural producer, I think, is probably apt, because there's so much random stuff I'm involved in. And it's hard to sort of categorize sometimes. Basically, we did this launch, invited traders to speak, invited people from the local community. And if you go to the next slide, we also invited, it was quite eclectic in that we invited a grime MC, Big Zoo. It's quite comical seeing Andy Slaughter and Big Zoo in the green room just chatting away. But again, it was, props to everyone who came through and sort of spoke in regards to wanting to save the market from being redeveloped in a way which would have left those traders, which would have meant a lot of traders who'd been historically there for about a century would have had to leave. So if you go to the next slide. So yeah, that, I guess so far that probably gives you a sense of two campaigns which involved creativity, involved cultural, involved sort of like zine making, involved event producing, involved inviting speakers of a varied background, and they both concern public space. This is probably a little bit different. This was, it still exists, Kidder Collective, which is a multidisciplinary arts collective involving British Muslim artists. And we started Kidder Collective in 2017 as a way to provide a sort of uncensored space for people who defined as British Muslim, whether they were culturally Muslim or very religious, or, you know, in any British Muslim, even adjacent, you know, Muslim adjacent, someone who's grown up with a lot of British Muslims and has picked up certain vernacular. And we wanted to provide a space for them to articulate themselves and speak for themselves outside of the sort of context of widespread Islamophobia in the media and in general culture. And we created a zine, and this is why I think the inspiration stuff is relevant, because in many ways the blueprint for that was who are zine makers and produce these zines. So we've to date published around 150 British Muslim artists and paid them for their work, and this was the first issue. So if you go on to the next one. So this is by an artist called Rui de Silva, who I will get onto, I think, if there's time, who's brilliant. He's also a music producer, and he produced this for the first issue, which is, for those unfamiliar, a fillet fish. Next slide. And so this is issue 2, and again, I think why this is relevant is because it's you know, using culture and creativity to give a community on the margins, so to speak, a voice. And I think you can apply that in different contexts. And I think the key thing is not to speak on people's behalf, especially within migrant context. It's not an area I'm massively experienced in, but I think from stories I've heard, I think it can go wrong if you attempt to speak on behalf of people. And the key thing is to always engage with communities and make sure you're just not repeating or replicating work that already exists. So if you go on to the next slide. So this was the second launch at Bush Theatre. And again, I think one of the maybe tips and pieces of advice is utilize the spaces in London. I think obviously COVID scenario is complicating that somewhat, but prior to this, we would often get free space from people who are, you know, sympathetic artistic directors or people who run spaces, community spaces, to give us free space. And in this case, Madani Yunus, who was artistic director at the time of Bush Theatre, gave us the space for free. This is just about hustling space and trying to get space to do our launches, etc. So if you go on to the next one. And this is the latest issue. And there's a new one being worked on by a brilliant team of new editors on the theme of water, but this issue was on frontiers. And the next slide, I'm not sure what's after this actually. So then I think in many ways, this is partly to do with storytelling and multimedia. So most recently, Kidder Collective have veered into creating animation shorts. And this was one we made called I Adastani by a poet called Talha Arsin. Talha was extradited from the UK on sort of, and never put on trial. So he was extradited from, he's a British citizen, was taken to the US, kept there for 6 years, 4 years without trial, came back. And the charges, the allegations rather, not the charges, were around him producing extremist or publishing extremist material. He was never put on trial, to be clear, and you know, spent 6 years essentially without, was released eventually after 6 years. And he wrote this poem in prison called I Adastani. We thought it was so massively powerful. It was just a reflection on borders, on the sort of imagined nature of borders and the arbitrary nature of power. And we published it in the 3rd issue of our magazine, and then produced a short animation film, which was animated by Malika Holder. And I think there's one slide after this. So again, this is probably quite partisan in terms of party politics, but this image is in relation to a music beat that was produced by Rui da Silva. And the idea came from me approaching him in the lead up to the 2017 general election and trying to galvanize support for Jeremy Corbyn. And again, it's related to creativity and campaigns in that it was about, right, what can we tangibly do apart from just actually volunteering for the Labour Party and handing out sort of, going door to door. And we thought we could also actually utilize, I'm not a music producer, but my friend is, let's get together. I have this idea. Let's use some of his audio clips, speeches, and create a grime beat out of that. And we did it without any expectation, I guess, to sort of, just put it out there with the hope that it would be used in some sort of campaigning purpose. And in the end, like sort of serendipitously, Grime for Corbyn reached out and wanted to use that beat. So in the end, we ended up getting about 100K, 150K views for it, which is, incredibly random. But I think in many ways that probably embodies creativity in campaigns, sort of using music, even though that's not it might not be your expertise, I think is my main point. But you might be involved in a producing capacity. I feel like I've talked a lot. I'm really apologize for that. I feel like I've chatted too much, but that's my final sort of slide, and that's my final point, I guess. That I think my sort of background is obviously in writing and beginning in writing and poetry, but ultimately it's also been involved producing. And I think in this context, it was around approaching someone and finding the budget or finding a means to make it happen. And in a similar way to what Hayley and Alicia said, is just go ahead and do it with the sort of considerations around not speaking on behalf of people and thinking through things. But yeah, being sort of using your own initiative to try and get things moving.
Thank you so much. That's incredible, and also quite a mesmerizing final slide there. Thank you so much to all our speakers. It's been absolutely incredible. I just think it's kind of, we've covered so much ground, and I think it's a real nice mix of kind of different mediums and also kind of different approaches to using creativity to kind of tell new stories. I will take questions, but I'm going to be sneaky and take the first question for myself. So I guess from a campaigning point of view, I feel like there's obviously kind of a lot of value in terms of showing the world as it is, and kind of getting the message out there of kind of the reality of the world that we're living in, and the inequality and the injustice that we're already living with. And then also there's kind of value in showing the world as it could be. And I guess I'm kind of interested to hear from all three of you guys as artists and producers, kind of whether you kind of tilt one way or the other in the work that you do and the work that you're kind of helping others to do. Yeah, what kind of, how you encourage others to kind of think about those things, whether there's kind of an intentional decision made or whether kind of things just go as they go. Don't know if anyone wants to start. Unmute yourselves and just jump in whenever you want.
Yeah, so for myself, my process is as I said, most of the time in regards to my art, I usually just free write, and then depending on what it's needed for, I always just be myself, my authentic self. I would say I don't really, I am sensitive to obviously some things that are happening, but if it's something that I'm really passionate about, I still articulate it in a way that's not, it shouldn't be offensive. It's just my feelings and my thoughts about a particular thing. And I always encourage the artists that we work with as well, you have to be true to yourself in putting work together, in sharing your work as well. But you also have to be open to the fact that not everybody may connect or resonate with what is important to you. And once you're okay with that, then it kind of opens up room for you to just be yourself artistically. But if you come from a position of, okay, I can't put it out because of this, bearing in mind, obviously, I always say respect, be respectful, in expressing yourself. However, still be authentic and true to yourself. Yeah.
I'll just jump on the back of that and just say, yeah, I agree with everything Hayley said. I think, you know, if you're making something that's coming from an honest place, then generally, you know, it should be positive. You know, if you're just being honest about how you're feeling and what you're thinking about a certain situation or cause or whatever it is you're wanting to make work about, you know, and it's coming from a good place, then I think it's reflective. You know, I think people can see that. I also think sometimes when you think too much about an audience, you know, that can sometimes be stifling. But on the other hand, you know, there might be certain things you're talking about, you know, where you need to consider like vocabulary you're using or the kind of language you're using, depending on what kind of things you're talking about. So it's like this fine line. But I just think if something's coming from like a good place inside you, then, you know, people can see that, you know, reflected in whatever it is you're making, whatever your output is.
I guess Alicia and Hayley have covered pretty much most of what I would say, but the only thing I'd add is around being wary of your intentions and sort of, I think I've heard of stories of people, especially within the sort of creativity within migrant campaigns or migrant context, of using the social capital of that to sort of advance yourself, especially if you don't have that background or that lived experience. I think that's the only thing I would consider in like, not the only thing, but it's an important consideration to think about.
Cool. Thank you so much. Okay, there's some amazing questions in the chat, so I'm going to throw this one open to everybody, including you, Minnie. So Emma says, interested on people's thoughts on the ethics of remuneration when working with artists, given that movements and artists are often both broke. So any thoughts at all on that kind of eternal conundrum?
Sorry, Ruth, can you just repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So Emma is talking about the ethics in terms of paying artists, given that, well, you know, in a context where movements and artists are often short of cash. I guess I can say from a JCWI point of view, so we are currently commissioning work that will help kind of kickstart the campaign that we're going to be launching, and those are paid opportunities, and that is something that we spent a lot of time thinking about, because there are different ways we could have gone about that. We want it to be a really open process, and we want as many voices to be heard as possible, and we want people who have experience firsthand of the system to be able to kind of share their stories. We don't want people to be doing work that isn't going to get compensated, or not to know if it's going to get compensated. And that's one option we had, was to run it as a competition. And for us, we felt that it wasn't right to run a competition where people might be spending considerable amounts of time doing something and not knowing whether it was, obviously you don't know if you're going to win the prize or not. So that's why we've structured it in this kind of paid way, but there are definite drawbacks to doing it as a paid opportunity, namely that it is work, and one of the key asks of this campaign is obviously to ensure that people have the right to work. Not everybody does have the right to work, and the process now doesn't include those people, which is a massive issue that we're stuck with, but we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But for us, we felt it was important not to ask anyone to do work that they didn't know if they were going to get paid for. So that's where we've kind of landed on that imperfect solution.
I'll just also add that I think there is like a really fine balance. I think this comes back to what Zain was saying about knowing what your role is and who you are and why you're asking for people to do things. And I would also say that there's a weird dichotomy there where we're sort of saying that artists aren't part of movements when they clearly are. You know, I think there's a balance between being an organisation that has funding and money and capacity to pay people, and allowing artists to produce their own work for their own purposes and their own means and add to that conversation as a part of the movement. So I think for me, it kind of feels like it depends who you are and why you're asking the question. And if you're trying to produce something and utilize an artist's work for a specific purpose, then you have to think carefully around how you financially support that person or support them in another way, whatever that looks like, and also how you facilitate a movement which is open and expressive and allows artists to thrive without it necessarily being a job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add to that, I feel like as an artist, it's always hard to like make a price. I feel like artwork doesn't really have a normal job rate. However, yeah, it definitely is important to, as an organizer, from the organizer perspective, to take into account that the artist may be having difficulties financially, and bearing that in mind because they're adding value to the platform that you're creating. So I guess it's all about communication and really listening to the artist that you're working with and meeting each other at a place that works for both of you before you've even moved before you even perform, basically, or before you even share your work, just having that conversation. But I know as an artist, sometimes it is an uncomfortable conversation, especially if you are, you care about the cause. Maybe you've been asked to do something specific to something you really care about, but then it's at your discretion if you feel like, okay, that is something that I can voluntarily do. But yeah, I'll just say always weigh up, as Zain was saying, like your intention. What do you want as an artist? What is your message? What is your mission for your art? And I guess that should sometimes help you align, yourself to the person's vision and meet at a mutual space.
Just briefly say, as to follow up on Hayley, the point about that Hayley made about some artists feeling like they can give the time, and I think what we did with Kidder Collective is a sliding scale. So if you're a more established writer or artist or illustrator, you have the option to sort of donate your fee. And with the event with Zadie Smith, she didn't take a fee, or didn't want to take a fee, which allowed us to pay other artists on the evening. So I think there's scope to do that. Personally, my own practice now, I think it depends on the context, but especially now with COVID, and especially before that, things were precarious as is the practice of just always paying the artist, or there is always funding out there. Like there are definitely funding pots, niche ones, or big ones. So there's ways of navigating that. I think if you're a producer and that's your role, then you should definitely, that should be your first port of call to try and find the funding to pay the artists. Personally.
Yeah, I agree with Zain there, and I think just drawing on I guess my experiences both as an artist and as an organizer, we were very lucky to be able to apply for funding and then have funding, and it was very important for us because we all come from arts backgrounds that we were paying the people we were collaborating with, regardless of whether we were friends with them or not. Just as practice, you're paying for someone's time and expertise, and I think sliding scale again is another good idea, but there are funding pots out there. It's just a case of looking for them and going through that hard task of applying for things, but that's also something you can do together with with other people, kind of as a collective. I found that to be a lot easier, if you've got someone you can collaborate with on that. But yeah, I definitely think it's good to at least offer compensation for people's time, and then kind of be honest and open and have that discussion with the artist, but it's just good practice to do that.
Thank you so much. I have another question, which you've kind of touched on some of this already, but I guess in terms of actually convening spaces that are for people to kind of come to and be creative or to kind of be expressive. Obviously, the last 6 months have turned everything upside down and everything's now gone online. Just kind of curious to hear whether you think there have been opportunities that have come out of that, or whether, kind of what have been the challenges and opportunities in terms of kind of carrying on the work that you were trying to get done. Any thoughts on that?
For me personally, particularly with Spoken, we were using a studio space. It's normally a photography studio, and they give us the space on a monthly basis to host our poetry night. So particularly with that in mind, it definitely shook us a little bit. It was almost like a volcano. It was like, oh my days, what we're going to do? The space isn't the space if it's not in the space. So it definitely challenged us to think outside of the box. Because usually around the summer, in the month of August, we always get endorsed by Red Bull. So every for the last 2 years, Red Bull has endorsed us to host our poetry summer event. And obviously this year it was like, no, it's not happening. So definitely found it very challenging. But now, we've decided that we are gonna launch some online sessions. But yeah, it's been a really difficult decision for us to make because we like the human element of our event. We're quite attached to that, and not everybody is open to sharing online because obviously it's quite vulnerable. It's more vulnerable, I guess, online because everyone's just watching. Whereas if you're face to face, you can have those intimate one-to-one conversations and really listen to what somebody's experiencing or what somebody needs support with, or even them listen to you, in that reciprocal kind of sense.
I think for us and Milka Chai, we've been in a similar situation to Hayley. I mean, our whole project is about getting people into a physical space together. So it's really just put us on pause. We've talked at length about trying to move things online, but again, it's that same thing of the conversation being quite disjointed and only one person being able to speak at a time. And we've thought about perhaps doing things via like post and allowing people to run their own Milka Chai at home, like sending them a copy of the zine and a couple of cups and that kind of thing. But we're working on that at the moment. That might be our way of like moving forward, depending on how long this situation continues. But yeah, it's really difficult for projects like that where it's all about cultivating friendships with new people. So yeah, who knows, maybe Milka Chai via post.
Okay, cool. There's another question in the chat, which I think is really big question, but really interesting. Is art enough to make a successful campaign? Does it always need to be accompanied by action or other forms of kind of campaigning action? Do you think there are examples of art kind of achieving things in its own right, or campaigns maybe that have artistic kind of work that has inspired change that you can think of?
Can I say something on this question? I sort of bang on about this all the time, that like I think we define success of campaigns really, really narrowly, and we always see it as sort of policy wins. And like I think this whole conversation has been really clear that you can achieve a successful campaign in lots of different ways. So I think we have to be really careful when we talk about successful campaigning, because the migrants' rights movement has a really hard time getting policy wins, and we have to celebrate the successes that we do have in other ways and across different forums and spectrums. And also, just as someone who has been involved in a lot of campaigns in a lot of different areas, like, I don't think that there is like a perfect recipe for what has made a campaign successful by whatever definition of success that you're using. Like, often it's quite unpredictable, and it maybe has some key elements in it, but there isn't like a path to winning a campaign that everyone can follow. And I think you just have to think really strategically about what it is that you want to achieve and how you want to do that, and set out your goals and your methodology really clearly if you're going to do it in a sort of practiced way of like trying to achieve something. But I would also say that lots of the time campaigns come up quite spontaneously and quickly and creatively, and they don't always encompass exactly what you imagine a campaign should be like. So that's just what I wanted to say on that.
I definitely believe that art and expression does have an impact. Last year, no, maybe not last year, maybe the year before, we were invited to the European Youth event and spoken, and that was in Strasbourg. And we were invited there to be a part of, policy. Well, policy. I'm trying to do rabbit fingers. Policy change. So we was invited last year, and then this year, funny enough, we were asked to actually run workshops with young people in Strasbourg. So unfortunately, the event was cancelled due to COVID, and they decided to take it online. But it just goes to show that even on that level, they are starting to see the impact of, having or creating real conversation through art. And I feel like that in itself, I don't know any other, examples of that, but for us personally as spoken, that was definitely an eye-opener to let us see that, okay, wow, people are starting to see the impact, especially with the younger generation, of what creativity can do and how that can shape and form policy going forward. So definitely would say it does have an impact. Maybe not what we want to see straight away, but it does often open the space for conversation. And sometimes the conversation is uncomfortable, but it's got to be done. It's got to be done, and they have to look into new ways, especially with this, the technology generation, as I call them, to really engage and to be able to serve them from a political standpoint as well.
Cool. I'm going to give a kind of last call for any more questions. And just while I'm doing that, I'm going to just say a little bit about this creative commission that we've got open. The information is all on the website, and I will also send around a link to it in the email. We've got 3 areas of work where we're looking for people to kind of pitch their ideas, and that is kind of infographic that would kind of show something on the immigration system broadly and the ways kind of systemically that people are being disadvantaged by our immigration rules. We have a series of portraits of people who've shared their story with us for the campaign that we're looking to get illustrated. And finally, we're looking for kind of posters and kind of really striking visual imagery. We also have an open brief, so any ideas that you have that are ways that we can kind of visually express the kind of messages that Minnie was talking about at the very beginning. All the information is on the website, as I say. We're closing the call for pictures on Monday morning, so you have kind of the next few days. But I would really encourage people to go and have a look at it, whether you're kind of a pro or whether you've never been commissioned before, but you just kind of have an idea and you think you could bring it to life, then definitely get in touch, because we're really interested to hear what people have to kind of contribute on the campaign, and we want to kind of reach out to new people. So yeah, do definitely send in your information. All the deadlines, all the kind of timings and everything is in there, but you can always drop me an email if anything's not clear or you have any questions to add in there. I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat which are quite specific, so I will answer those, or maybe I'll send you links to the information on the website. Cool. Are there any final questions, or if not, I think we will wrap up. Let me just have a quick look in the chat box. Oh yeah, okay, this is an amazing question. Do you have any thoughts on this initiative by Banksy and how it relates to kind of community engagement, or work that you're involved with? Or I guess just put, like, your thoughts on this kind of Banksy thing. And for anyone who hasn't seen, Banksy has funded a search and rescue boat which is operating in the Mediterranean, which has had numerous problems in the last week with not being picked up. But yeah, before I say any more, any thoughts or kind of reflections on that kind of celebrity kind of clout, as Zane put it, and any thoughts on that?
I'm not massively familiar with, like, I was just gonna say I'm not familiar with Banksy's work. I am, but not in a very in-depth, like, I'm not familiar with that kind of mural street art is what I mean. So I'm not sure the ins and outs of the scene. So part of, like, I think it's like I said prior in the Zadie conversation, there's pros and cons to it, because it can overshadow a campaign. It can detract, and it can end up necessarily being about the individual. I think the other example I was thinking of, so there's Marcus Rashford most recently in regards to food justice, but there's also the Russell Brand using his sort of clout in the Focus E15 campaign. And I think, again, in each of those instances, there's probably examples of it being like, at a certain point, that person is perhaps taking up too much space. And I think the danger of celebrity is that person is usually, in some ways used to the attention. But I think with Banksy, it's slightly different, because he's anonymous, isn't he? So those are my thoughts.
Anyone else want to jump in? I guess I just, I think it's really interesting, and I wondered whether, because there have been this weekend issues in terms of, I've lost myself, where have I gone? Because there have been issues in terms of the boat getting permission to kind of dock and for people to be unloaded. I wondered whether Banksy having his name on that has in any way kind of helped bring that to prominence, which I thought was an interesting thing. But it's a really good point that you make, Zane, like the kind of risk of someone kind of overriding, kind of taking over a campaign. I think we're going to wrap up, but I just want to say an absolute huge thank you to all our speakers today. It's been really incredible to hear from all of you and to see the work that you've been doing. And I just think it gives us really good food for thought, and hopefully you're feeling inspired like I am, like, yes, we can do this and we can make stuff happen. So I just want to say a quick thank you, and huge thank you to everybody for joining as well. I will post the recording online shortly, but if you have any questions at all, you've got my email address, and just drop me a line. So thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.